I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight. Senior Chinese diplomat Yang Jiechi has called for better China-U.S. relations in his first remarks since the U.S. President Joe Biden took office. In a virtual meeting with board members of the National Committee on U.S. China Relations, Yang says China is willing to work with the U.S. to move the relationship forward, but will also stand firm in defending China's interests. He highlighted what both sides could do to put the relationship back on a positive track toward peaceful coexistence. Take a look.
As the new U.S. administration moved into the White House nearly 2 weeks ago, Chinese Communist Party's senior official for foreign affairs says the relationship between China and the U.S. stands at a defining moment.
China and the United States are the world's two largest economies, as well as prominent members of the UN Security Council. Effective cooperation between the two has a direct bearing on the well-being of all people, as well as peace, development, and global prosperity.
Yang said for the past few years, the Trump administration adopted misguided policies against China, plunging the relationship into its most difficult period since the establishment of the diplomatic ties. He added attempts from the U.S. side seeking decoupling and a potential Cold War have seriously damaged China-U.S. ties and fundamental interests. At this critical juncture, Yang said it's time for the two countries' relationship to get on a more predictable and constructive track.
China is prepared to work with the United States to move the relationship forward along the track of no conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation for the well-being of both countries and peoples.
So, what can we learn from the remarks of Mr. Yang Jiechi? On that, I interviewed Douglas Paul, who attended the virtual meeting on Tuesday. He is a seasoned diplomat from the U.S. and certainly a scholar on decades of U.S. China relations. Take a look. Thanks to the speech given by Mr. Yang Jiechi, China's top diplomat. Tell me more about it, because you were in that meeting with State Councilor Yang without really revealing what's off the record content. Tell me more about your general impression about what he's trying to propose.
Well, I think he is trying to send a message that his door is open to a new beginning with a new administration. It was the ceremonial display of a willingness to discuss substantive issues that constitutes the real importance of the meeting.
Now, the new administration coming into the U.S. only for a week or two, not necessarily been clarifying approach to China. What do you make of the nature likely to be touched on by Washington, this White House?
Well, as I think they've made clear throughout the political campaign and now in their first days in office, the Biden administration feels it has to attend to domestic issues first. Second order is to rebuild alliances damaged by the Trump administration. And then third, we'll be getting on to concrete issues. But I think that the expectation of a high level of focus on international relations would be misplaced. We have COVID, economic crisis, and race relations at home that take precedence.
Mr. Paul, in the speech given by State Councilor Yang, he talked about several common areas for international cooperation with the United States. COVID, which you also mentioned, quite top on the agenda of the U.S. administration, global warming, and also about economic recovery. He also mentioned about peacekeeping and some of the other issues that both countries could do together. Are these pragmatic? And whether there are going to be concrete steps taken by the U.S. side, given what you have just said about the realities of politics now?
Well, I think these are also things that were mentioned by the new Secretary of State Blinken in his testimony to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in Congress. And I think the two sides have been trying to send signals to each other that on these big transnational issues, there's scope for cooperation. How you get to that cooperation, whether there are conditions, that's unknown. We heard last week from some Chinese spokespeople that the cooperation on transnational issues will not be as possible if there are still tricky bilateral issues that get in the way. I hope that's not the case. And I did not hear that today from State Councilor Yang. So I hope that we're now past that kind of point, and the two sides can explore ways to cooperate on these overriding issues, non-proliferation, COVID, global economic development, and other transnational issues.
If there's no correction of the earlier policy approach by the earlier administration, then there might be consequences. Mr. Paul, you know, and everybody knows, before the earlier administration bid goodbye to the rest of the world, they tried to set some pitfalls and traps for the current administration. Well, it might be very political for your internal politics, but it does have consequences on your relations with other countries, China particularly, which is quite a very important relationship, and the rest of the world. U.S. allies also want to make clear what kind of policy the U.S. would have with China, because they don't want to choose the lines. I've been hearing these things from many. So, Mr. Paul, if there's no correction, will the mistakes continue to be repeated?
Well, I think that the things will not be as they were before. There will be some similar themes. Some issues will rhyme with the past. But as we move along, it's like Heraclitus said, you never step in the same river twice. Things change, the context changes. And so my advice to people watching this would be patient. We're only less than 2 weeks into this new administration. And there's still a lot of ground laying, personnel placement, and policy formulation to be done before we can start making predictions about friction or the absence of friction.
We heard quite extended speech, almost half an hour, presented by State Councilor Yang. Of course, there are a lot of complimentaries to those that are attending the meeting, who have been giving their contribution to the building of China-U.S. relations since Dr. Kissinger secretly with China, 1970s. But a lot of it also shows China's consistent approach when it comes to its thoughts about China-U.S. relations. With that thought, do you think today's Washington would first of all understand, and secondly, appreciate, thirdly, willing to work on some of these issues?
I think understanding is there. The new administration has experienced people with practical time in office in previous administrations to understand the issues. Appreciation, well, you can appreciate things in two ways. One, well, not much has changed, and we have to deal with the long-lasting, difficult issues that have to be managed that don't get solved easily. And then there'll be appreciation if we can find some way of taking initiatives to break the log jams in our in specific areas. It's going to be, again, a learning process. I wish we could hear more on the Chinese side of specific things, or see without hearing changes in behavior from the Chinese side that suggest wanting to take a new step. And in that respect, I think State Councilor Yang's symbolic presence to talk to a large American audience is an indication of such an initiative.